Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fourth day of ISWI. Welcome to this digital edition of ISWI 2021 with the theme of climate change, environmental compensation, and sustainability. Our future or responsibility, there is no planet B. We're really glad to have you here. And as we have been doing in the other sessions today, we're on a panel discussion from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. talking about sustainable energy. I will now tell you the agenda for today. And please don't forget to send us all your questions in the Discord channel or also in the YouTube, here at the YouTube stream. So, we are going to have today three speakers, and the agenda for today is as it follows. We're going to start with the speakers introducing them by themselves. And then we're going to talk about technology for the first 20 minutes. Then we're going to do the Q&A for 10 minutes. Then we're going to talk about society and sustainable energy. Then we're going to talk about politics. And then we're going to have an open questions again for me to review all the questions that were not done. So please don't hesitate to do this on the Discord channel. And to introduce our theme of sustainable energy, fossil fuels are currently the world's primary energy source, while being responsible for the rise of CO2 emissions and large amounts of local air pollution. Renewable energy plays a key role in the decarbonization of our energy systems. But not all renewable energy is also sustainable. During this panel discussion, we will talk about the transition towards sustainable energy while touching on topics like energy storage and social implications. With that said, now I can introduce the speakers. First, we have I'm still alone here. I'm back. Okay, while we wait for the speakers, um, you tell me please in the Discord channel, what do you know about sustainable energy? Because really, I am the first question that I'm gonna ask to our speakers is about what is sustainable energy for them, and if they can give me a short description of this, because I'm really a newbie in this theme and I don't know that much. So I welcome the speakers. Now they can enter the room. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
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 So we're going to start with the introduction of yourself. And I was told that Hanna was.
I'm gonna go first. Okay, thank you. So my name is Hanna Dura, and I work at the DECHEMA, which is the German Society for Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology. We're located in Frankfurt, and essentially at the core of our work lies networking, connecting, and also supporting advances in the chemical technology, also chemical process industry, and biotechnology to help push towards a more sustainable development in these areas. So we have different focus areas that you can see on the slide before on the right hand. Sorry, was a little bit too quick. We have different focus areas that we work in, ranging from water management through biotechnology all the way to energy and climate, where I'm a part of. And now, next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, as I mentioned, I am part of the energy and climate team. And as the name already suggests, we deal with questions regarding renewable and sustainable energy supply, with regard specifically to the chemical industry and also how we can meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets. So basically in that regard, two things are most important. The first one is to kind of see how the chemical industry can be transformed to be sustainable, on the one hand for the energy supply and on the other hand also for the feedstock. The second part is that the chemical industry, once it is transformed, can and will also have to play like a big role to provide the same type of transformation for other sectors, such as, for example, heating, transportation, consumer goods, and so on and so on. So this is where my background kind of comes into play in the next slide. I studied environmental sciences with a focus in life cycle assessment, and I can bring this expertise into the different research projects that we work at. And I do that since 2016, like I said, at DECHEMA, and my work encompasses the coordination and management of various research projects that you can see on the left-hand side. The H2 Mare is like the newest one, the newest edition that just started last month. And this project essentially deals with using offshore wind energy to produce, for example, hydrogen directly offshore. So you don't transport the renewable electricity, you transport the hydrogen to the shore. I also deal with evaluating new technologies and products within that realm. So I look at like the ecological and economic performance, the upscaling, and how this new technology can be incorporated into like existing production facilities and into existing infrastructures. And in this regard, one of the most important things always is to put all the individual results into context. So you have your individual like economic performance and ecological performance, and the key then is to kind of put it all into the context of the entire like industry that you're looking at, and put it also into context regarding the greenhouse gas emission targets, well, essentially carbon neutrality, and also the entire timeline until we reach that. And that was it from my side.
Thank you. So now we can continue with Tamara.
Yep, thank you very much. My name is Tamara Verenich, and I am from Russia, from St. Petersburg. And in 2019, I participated in ISWI 2019, and it was a very nice moment and a trip for me. So I'm very happy that I'm here today, now as a panel speaker. I am now a European Solidarity Corps volunteer, and I volunteer at an organization called EKOenergy. EKOenergy is an international non-profit initiative by the Finnish Association for Nature Conservation. And I personally work on contacting international companies as well as Russian companies. I write articles about renewable energy, and I create communication materials. And on top of that, I love participating in climate action, and I join Fridays for Future. Yep. So what is exactly EKOenergy ecolabel? So our ecolabel is used on products as well as buildings to show that this product, for example, has been made with 100% not only renewable but also sustainable energy. Or if you see our logo on a building, you know this building uses 100% sustainable energy that meets our criteria, which includes tracking of origin and sustainability. An example of our criteria regarding sustainability can be, for example, that the wind and solar farms are built in the areas where they are less detrimental for the environment, when they are basically safe for the environment to be. And our ecolabel is a communication tool for 100% sustainable energy, and it works not only for electricity but also for gas and heating as well as cooling. Next. Thank you. And our concrete results include our climate fund. So each consumer contributes 10 cents per megawatt hour of consumed eco-energy labeled sales, and energy seller contributes to our climate fund, and then with this money we fund projects against energy poverty and the projects that contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also work on communication campaigns. Last year, for example, EKOenergy made a fashion campaign. And before that, we worked on the brewery campaign as well. So we encouraged companies join EKOenergy and use EKOenergy in their production. And this year, we are working on the Cosmetics Center. So our international team of volunteers and I ask cosmetics companies from all over the world to join us and to also communicate about what they do. Yeah, so that's basically my background.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Henrik.
Yes. Hi, everybody, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Henrik Maatsch. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for Climate and Energy with the WWF Germany, and I'm mainly focused with my work on the national policy sphere, obviously also connected to the to our work with our colleagues in Brussels and coordinating our work between Berlin and Brussels. For those who don't know, I'm just going to quickly introduce the organization I'm with, for those who are not familiar with the WWF. Yeah, it's one of the largest conservation organizations in the world. We are active in over 100 countries worldwide, and yeah, have a lot of supporters, over 5 million supporters worldwide. And our staff counts over 6,000, fluctuating and rising rapidly across the world. I think in Germany we are about 300 something colleagues, with the largest office in Berlin. And we obviously have a lot of different project regions across the country and across the world. Next, please. In Germany, we are we have over 500,000 supporters, which is quite significant. That brings us in the range of large political parties and their supporter base, such as the CDU, the Conservative Party, or the Social Democrats. And obviously, we use this leverage and the support that we have in the civil society to address pressing issues on climate change towards politicians, companies, and political parties alike. Next, please. So maybe not surprisingly, it's the main goal for the WWF to conserve our biological diversity and to conserve a living planet for us and our children. Thus, it's very nice and that you thought of me to invite us here when we're speaking about yeah, climate action and that there is no planet B. We are centered historically on typical conservation policies, conservation issues. However, I think since Kyoto, it became increasingly important to speed up our climate and energy work. The climate and energy team is constantly growing, and the importance of climate and energy policy inside the WWF is growing, as you know, because in fact our core goals, the conservation work, will not be sustained unless we take urgent action against climate change. Next, please. Now I'm just going to highlight a few spotlights of our work, mainly my work that we conducted throughout the last years. On the left side, this is just a report that we called Germany's Electric Future. In fact, we tried after Paris to conduct an exercise, let's say, to narrow down the remaining CO2 budget that is in line with Paris for nation states such as Germany, based on a global CO2 budget per capita allocation, and basically showing what different pathways do we have when it comes to installing 100% renewables energy system, and how will that translate towards the land use and the regionalization of renewable energy sources and path dependencies that grow from there when it comes to grid development and also issues such as the land use, the permitting and planning procedures. And this is just two graphs touching probably on things that we will discuss later. I think it is increasingly important in Germany at the moment, but probably the same in other European countries, as far as I know, that we will in fact discuss the land use as one critical constraint for the deployment of renewable energy. And this is just showing you 6 district communal unities. I mean, there are 400 local Landkreise, they are called in German, communal districts. And we basically narrowed down no-go and to-go areas, so to speak, for different sources of renewable energy. In this case, this is for wind energy, and to address where can you safely plan wind energy, or where are you running into conflicts either with the local people because they're too close at a distance where they're living, or where you have very large biodiversity concentrations and are therefore running into permitting issues. Next, please. Also touching on a discussion I think that is increasingly important when we are about to implement the RED II directive is what is the status of sustainability for renewable energy sources in the EU certificate market. We know that quality matters, and we're going to discuss this, that nature-friendly solutions are not yet that much represented in the market for RES certificates. And I see that the colleagues from EKOenergy are about to change this, and I'm happy to learn about this. I didn't know you guys before, but just quickly wanted to highlight some issues from our perspective. In our opinion, we do not think that hydro, especially run-of-river and wood biomass, is a sustainable source of renewable energy. We do think that leads to a lot of conflicts with our biodiversity conservation policy. And already touching on a definition you were asking before, in the eye from in our view, wind and solar, or what we would say low carbon and low impact solutions, is what we would consider a sustainable source for renewable energy. And those are just reports that we published also together with other NGOs such as Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, and so on across Europe and Germany to highlight those issues and to sensibilize politicians to differentiate that there is not only renewable energy, but that there is better renewable energy and worse renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this introduction and for already bringing some discussion points. That's really nice. Like I said before, I am not an expert like you are in this field. So I would really like to start with theme sustainability 101. And let's start with the question for every one of you. What do you understand by sustainable energy? Could you tell me a little bit about your definition of it? I don't know who wants to start. Hanna.
I can go, I guess. I guess Henrik already kind of answered that. That's actually an interesting thing because I don't think I have ever been asked about the distinction between renewable and sustainable. That's usually used interchangeably, but I would say that for me, the renewable energy would be kind of a prerequisite to sustainable energy. So renewable would mean that it's a source that kind of grows back, that you will never run out of, like wind, like the sun, like biomass. But the sustainable part comes into play more on how you use it and how you deploy it. So of course, if you, for example, biomass, if you use it at the same kind of amounts and speeds that it can grow back in a natural way without compromising biodiversity, that would be a sustainable source. But if you just cut down all the trees and you don't care about biodiversity and these sort of things, then that would be not sustainable. And another important thing, I think, in that regard is also looking into the other aspects of sustainability so that people can pay for it, because otherwise it's not going to be used. and that you also look at social aspects with that.
Thank you very much. But then, is there a difference between renewable and sustainable, or like you said, there are just terms that you change?
Usually they are used in a interchangeable way, at least in my experience. I don't know about the other speakers, maybe they have different experience with that.
Yeah, I guess I can answer the question. The difference between renewable and sustainable is that, for example, as Henrik has already mentioned, not all of the energy produced, let's say, in a hydropower plant, we can't call it 100% sustainable because, for example, it destroys fish migration in this river. So it is not sustainable by definition. And because then the rivers don't have fish, right? So it's not very sustainable. But the energy is renewable because the stream of the river works. But and same with like our criteria, for example. So we only can get you can only get EKOenergy eco-label if the energy is sustainable. So that means that we have like very strong criteria, and it has to also preserve biodiversity, and it basically works towards that. But yeah, there are lots of different ways of renewable energy, but not a lot of ways to get sustainable energy.
Okay, I understand. So sustainable energy is energy that can be renewable and doesn't have to harm the atmosphere or the surroundings. Okay, I got it. Nice. And could you tell me a little bit of how, because of your experience or about your knowledge, how is the state of sustainable energy in Germany and in Europe?
Well, maybe I can quickly touch upon that. As I mentioned before, in our point of view, it's most importantly that we have a low impact and low cost, and that means low impact when it comes obviously to CO2 emissions, but also other let's say climate relevant emissions, but also low impact when it comes to the whole value chain and the resource footprint, so to speak, that you will generate with implementing renewable energies. Also, most importantly, and as mentioned before by Tamara and Hanna, a low impact when it comes to potentially violating intact biodiversity. And the low cost, I think, is important both from an intergenerational justice perspective, that you are not leaving future generations with issues such as nuclear waste disposal, but also that you are addressing factors such as economic feasibility that are then not only an economic advantage in the international competition, so to speak, that states or nation states are or economies are in, but also that you have a socially acceptable levelized cost of generation that is in fact not leaving customers with very high power bills, so to speak. And in Germany, I think we are touching a point where we have the last 20 years projected, especially when it comes to onshore wind and offshore wind, on sites that are not critical. However, we are now reaching a point where where we need to repower those first generation renewable sites, and also where it becomes increasingly difficult to find new areas that are not touching sensible areas with regard to biodiversity or with regard to social acceptance, in a way that you need to have certain distances towards housing and so on. And I think that this has not yet been much discussed in public. I think for the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen a very, very strong discussions amongst the experts with the ministries of the both on the federal level as well as on the state level, depending on the different states and their agenda towards being progressive or rather slowing progression down. But I think that it's fairly easy at the moment for people who want to stop or want to prolong projects. And that has also increased drastically with the switch towards auctioning schemes to prolong projects due to environmental conflicts. And I think the jurisdiction in Germany is not yet up to date to face the huge challenge that we have in front of us to go towards, in our point of view, to go towards plus 75, 80% share of renewables within the next decade. So I think the jurisdictional system, and that's an extremely complicated issue, is not yet up to date. We are discussing targets, but now is the decade for implementation, and we drastically need to address those little details and the fine tuning to get the machine running.
Thank you. And now, Germany is now powered with carbon, and which other, and the wind mills, and which other powered energy do we have here in Germany? Because I think nuclear energy is not in question anymore.
Not in question anymore, to be phased out, I think, by the end of 2022. I'm not sure how many reactors we are still running, but we do have a slight share remaining until the last one is going to be phased out by the end of 2020. I'm not sure about the exact percentages. I know that the share of renewables should be around 45 at the moment. Please correct me. And there's a good deal of a fair share between offshore wind, onshore wind, and PV solar, with a also not so small share of bioenergy. So I think Germany has a very diverse generation mix, and that's, in my opinion, quite an advantage to be discussing different pathways that we're going to use or different combinations. For example, in comparison to France, that has a much less diversified generation mix.
Do you know about some emerging technologies other than, for example, I didn't know that you could make energy out of these bio chemicals. That's really interesting.
What do you mean biochemicals? Sorry.
The bio materia. I don't know the word in English. What do you explain, Hanna, that you can you do this from bio stuff? I didn't know this. Are there other emerging technologies in the sustainable energy area?
There are now, definitely. So this is, for example, Power to X. This is one of the projects that I kind of touched upon a little bit. So that actually uses renewable electricity to produce hydrogen, and then you go into like rather longish chemical processes where you can produce, for example, there's one company in Germany that produces foam for mattresses, where they incorporate some CO2 as a resource into the product, or you can produce fuels like, for example, jet fuel or diesel and gasoline and things like that. So they're usually called like synthetic fuels or e-fuels. You can do that, but there is you have obviously a lot of like energy loss along the way, because the production of it takes a long time, and the more steps you have in between, the more like every step you have, every step will cost you some energy. So it takes a little bit of energy to produce it in the first place. But another thing I might like to add is Germany is doing quite well with electricity, renewable electricity. But one thing that is a lot of times kind of left out are the other sectors. So, for example, heat or energy that is needed for like the process industry, because the process industry, for example, producing steel, concrete, or chemical products, they need very high temperatures, and they still rely on gas and fossil fuels like that. And this is very, very difficult to like defossilize or decarbonize, because a lot of these processes don't work with electricity, so you need completely new processes. And if you look, for example, at the transportation sector, Germany has not met its targets at all. So we are still, just from the transportation sector point of view, we are still at exactly the same level we were 30 years ago in 1990. So nothing really has happened there. So I think it's important to kind of distinguish between the kind of type of energy and where this energy is needed. Because like I said, in electricity-wise, that's pretty much fine. We know what to do. But like for the industry sector, for transportation sector, that's much more difficult.
Okay. And are there some technologies where we could, for example, they're asking in Discord or public, where you can recycle CO2 or make something with the CO2 we emit?
Yeah, so that's the carbon capture and utilization technology, and this is part of the power tax as well. So yeah, this is one way to also produce these like synthetic fuels or e-fuels that I just touched upon. You use CO2 that is incorporated then into the product. The thing is then just, especially if you make fuels or if you make any type of other products with it, once you burn it again, the CO2 is then released again in the air. So you kind of need to make sure that if you do carbon capture and utilization, you kind of try to keep it in the loop. So to speak, that the kind of intake into the atmosphere and the CO2 that you take out kind of levels itself out.
Wow. Thank you for the insights. I think it's amazing how this process are made, and I studied communication, so I never thought about all these processes and all the things that you can do for energy. I think as a normal person, so to say, I just turn off and on my light, and then it's amazing how to think and to be aware about all these processes and what could change. That's why now, as a personal point of view and as a normal person, we're gonna go to the more common discussions, more to the they're asking me here to the public discussions. Why are those technologies you named solar power, wind power, biomass, why are they better than, for example, nuclear energy or nuclear fusion? That's what the public wants to know.
Maybe I can answer. So basically, the problem with nuclear is that it has a lot of risks. And in history, unfortunately, we already have these moments when nuclear went like not the way that it planned to be. And unfortunately, we cannot rely on it. And also, nuclear is becoming much more expensive day by day. So it is also one of the disadvantages if we look from the normal person's point of view. And also with nuclear, you cannot just go and install a nuclear power plant, but you can opt for solar and for wind. And you, if you want, everyone have roofs who have roofs under their heads. They can install solar panels, and basically they will have electricity, but they can't just go and take nuclear. And also, nuclear is not very renewable because it uses fossil fuels, like fossils, like uranium. So it's also one of the disadvantages. We can't really rely on it.
Thank you.
And I think one of like major aspects that I think at least is getting overlooked as well a little bit is that I don't think that the price for nuclear energy really includes like all the costs that it actually has, because you have then the residue that you have to store away somewhere for hundreds and thousands of years, so they still don't really know where and how to store it. And the cost of that is then actually essentially paid by the taxpayer over the next 100, 200, 500 years, as long as the residue is still stored. And that is not something you will see on your electricity bill, but that is something you will kind of have in your taxes, and that you will still have to pay for.
And maybe also adding to this, I think the long-term costs, as Hanna mentioned, are really hard to calculate. And but even in the short term, if you look at the feed-in tariff that EDF and the British government agreed upon for Hinkley Point C, which is inflation corrected throughout, I think, the next 30 years, basically leaves Hinkley Point out of the market. I mean, this is a highly cost-intensive issue for UK, and they would have been much better off economically with the installation of renewables. And I think this will become increasingly basically increasingly how can I say this apparent throughout the next years that it's just, besides, let's say, the ideological or political debate that is extremely different when you look into France or in Germany, let's say, but when it comes towards the return of your investment, I think the case is crystal clear, and more and more investors will look at it from this perspective, and that basically leaves nuclear, in my point of view, out of the question.
And is it actually? I know that nuclear, and how you explain it, it creates a lot of rest and bad stuff. But is it actually the one that makes the most energy, or for example, wind creates more energy than this nuclear fusion?
Nuclear fusion, in my opinion, is not yet readily available, or only on test sites. And as far as I'm informed, those test runs, or let's say at least the availability for large scale application, will only be ready when we are much too much advanced yet in battling climate change. So it's a technology option that is becoming available much too late for our dire need to address climate change drastically now. So that's the first thing. And when it comes towards the share of nuclear within the generation mixes of the different countries worldwide, I do not necessarily. I have to pass on that one. I'm not familiar with the national shares. I do know that France has a obviously very high share. I think it's about 4/5 of the generation mix, something like that. But I think that that this will also decrease drastically. And I'm not sure about the current state of this former Hollande plan. I'm not sure if that is currently being discussed in France, but there was the idea to drastically reduce the share of nuclear power within the French generation mix, at least.
And talking about accessibility and the other, for example, solar powered, wind powered, biomass, how accessible do you think are these technologies globally? Are we on a good level globally, or do we need to accelerate more the process to go globally into more sustainable energies?
Well, I think that, of course, we need more, and I think that we don't have enough right now. However, when we think now we are in Europe, I'm personally right now in Helsinki, and I feel a lot of this like, oh, but what is the situation in third world countries? They are like, we think of third world countries as like, oh, they just live like in poverty and they basically hardly exist. However, at the same time, some third world countries, as they're called, are doing better renewable energy wise than European countries. For example, Puerto Rico is one of the leaders. So yeah, like the situation is actually not as we imagine it. I think that also EKOenergy works towards that too. There are regions with energy poverty, and our climate fund funds projects that work in third world countries and developing countries. And we had projects in Madagascar, in Tajikistan, for example. And and we help those countries to have sources. Like, for example, we built solar panels on top of an internet cafe. So yeah, that's also our contribution. But yeah, it's definitely never enough. And at the moment, no, it's not accessible enough.
Okay.
Maybe adding to that, I think that is another issue with nuclear power, that you are, well, besides from the discussion about small nuclear reactors that are being pushed by certain investors in the US, I think that you have the issue with relying on a stable and let's say rather centralized grid infrastructure, whereas with renewables you have the chance to access very remote areas. You not necessarily need an existing large scale or centralized grid infrastructure. You can basically install or set up microgrids, allowing remote areas to leapfrog the development and directly go towards a renewable energy based electrification, and obviously at a much cheaper cost than towards going compared with centralized solutions such as nuclear, or even, as in some states, large centralized hydropower projects with the obvious devastating impact on biodiversity.
Okay. And at the economical and access level, do you think what is being done to make sustainable energy is accessible to all social classes?
Well, I can say something and also follow Henrik's ideas, because yeah, I also agree that if we come back to even if we go to fossil fuels, for example, if we talk about gas and oil, that yeah, this kind of decentralizes the energy market, and we are no longer as dependent on government as we were. And to this question as well, I think that of course, the more the demand will be, the more people will be opting for products made with 100% renewable energy, or ideally sustainable energy, or the more people will install solar panels and participate in that, talk about it, and have conferences and panel discussions like this today, the more accessible this renewable and sustainable energy will be. So I think, of course, right now there are problems with that, but renewable energy is becoming cheaper than fossils. And if I'm not mistaken, it's already cheaper in some countries. So yeah, I think that we should show the demand in order for the change to happen. And also that we should also participate in this transition, and we will make it cheaper and more accessible to all social classes.
Thank you. Now that we're talking about technology and society also, that is going to be our next topic. I have here the information of, for example, acceptance of technologies, and there was a study that it's called Invisible Kids that was made from DECHEMA and WWF in cooperation. I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about this study.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So that was again with the Power to X project, and that was really the question that, you know, now we are researching and trying to develop and put into place technologies that we ourselves probably will not be using anymore, but it will be kind of left for the next generation, so to speak. And so the goal here was really to kind of target young people, students from like high school, but also from university, from these ages, and to first of all introduce them to what this technology is in the first place, because most people don't really know what it is and that it exists. So yeah, it was the goal to kind of explain to them what it is, how it works, and to also get kind of a little bit of feedback from them, what they think about it. And they have made a Sommerwerkstatt, which is kind of like a summer workshop that went on for like 4 days, where they had different people presenting. I presented there as well twice. And they also visited some research sites and also some startup companies that are already starting to produce, for example, these synthetic fuels. So it really targets kind of the younger generation to introduce them to it and to get a little feedback.
Oh, that's really interesting. Do you have something to add, Henrik?
Yeah, but just really from the sidelines, as a former colleague of mine was involved in that special project. As far as I know, and I've seen some interviews and also some YouTube clips that we did with, or interviews that we did with younger that we did, for example, with YouTube influencers from our side with the WWF. It was really interesting to talk to young people that are not associated with our climate and energy bubble, and get to know what they do think about the transition, or the energy transition and climate change, and the technological options that we have. And I think it was extremely interesting to sensibilize them for example, for hydrogen as an energy carrier, and therefore just to start the process of what is an energy carrier, what is the emission intensity of a certain energy carrier, and how do we let's say what is the time frame it took for a certain energy content to be put, let's say, into gas or into oil, and how can this be transformed towards the energy density with hydrogen coming from renewables and so on, and therefore just starting to create an awareness for the myriad of questions that we still need to address. For example, also when it comes to the share of renewables that we need worldwide to be able to produce enough hydrogen to sustainably, obviously, in order to fuel the high temperature processes that Hanna mentioned in the beginning in the chemical industry, for example, in Germany.
And talking about again about society, do you think that, because that this question came from our Discord chat, do you think there is a fair distribution of sustainable energy between countries who have the source but not the capacity, and countries who have the capacity to transform the energy but not the natural resources?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. I mean, in the intro slides, I spoke about a constraint, a political constraint, that is the availability of land. However, that does not mean that, for example, in Germany, there is, let's say, a scarcity of available land. There is enough space to install sufficient renewable energy sources to power 100% sustainable, renewable macroeconomy in Germany, and there is also in the European Union. So I think at the moment it's clear that OECD states, let's say industrialized countries, do need to finance drastically climate efforts in developing and emerging nations. That is for sure. But I do not think that there is a limit on both sides from natural constraints and availabilities of land or resources, and that's in that regard.
Thank you. What do the others think?
Well, I do think that the distribution is essentially the same way it is now with fossil fuels. There are some countries who have resources, like fossil resources, and some countries who don't. Like Germany, for example, now is importing most of its fossil resources. And I think that will still be true for renewable and sustainable energy sources. There will be some countries who have, I don't know, a lot of wind, a lot of sun. They are called these sweet spots, like Chile, for example. They're like one of those so-called sweet spots for production of hydrogen that are very intensely discussed these days. And I think that sort of distribution will just shift, so that some countries who now export a lot of fossil resources, they will not export them anymore because we hopefully won't be using them anymore. And so that will change. There will be other countries who will have like a surplus of renewable energy that they can then export and transport. So for Germany, I think that we can't sustain ourselves regarding electricity, like sustainable electricity. But looking at like all the other sectors that I mentioned in the beginning, like the industry sector with the chemical industry, the transport sector, and so on and so forth, I don't think we will be able to just do it by ourselves. So we will need the connection within the European Union, and maybe even beyond that, to like import and export the resources just like we did before.
Thank you. And Tamara, and other thoughts or?
I mean, yeah, I definitely agree with what Henrik and Hanna said. And when we talk about equal distribution, we shouldn't forget that, yeah, indeed, there are countries that, for example, nowadays, Russia has a lot of, and we work on export, yeah, so we export fossil fuels. But it doesn't mean anything. Like, Russia is not the richest country in the world. It's not like, I'm not going to to say much about it, but yeah, and the same with, like, for example, more sunny regions, they will have a lot of solar, but will it definitely mean that they will not live, that the nations in these countries will not live in energy poverty? We don't know, right? So I think the distribution is not the key, but it's more how you use it and what technology you actually use and what you do with this resource.
And adding to that, I think what will become increasingly important is an eye-to-eye level international partnership with those sweet spots, as Hanna mentioned them beforehand. Looking, for example, at Morocco, another one of those so-called sweet spots. I think it's very important that on the race towards net zero until 2040, 45, so that's something like that. It is crucial that we enable those soon to be exporting nations to become 100% sustainably sourced at first hand, and then that they do then have the or at parallel have a clear perspective towards generating revenues with exporting renewably sourced, be it electricity or be it hydrogen or whatever. But I think this is a bit left out of the discussion, and that is maybe also touching upon the thing like the international credit system and certificates and so on. And we have had poor experiences with the joint implementation mechanism and CDI and so on. And I think that it is increasingly important that there is no such a thing as, okay, we are not going to change much here in Germany. We are just going to use fossil fuel electricity, and we are going there. We're just going to plant or we're just going to install some wind turbines somewhere in the global south and just make it a balance, let's say an electricity swap or something like that. But we really need to understand that every single country in the world is part of the race towards net zero, and therefore I think it's very important not to think, oh yeah, we're just going to get our electricity or we're going to get our clean energy product from somewhere in the world, but we are not necessarily interested in supporting them with the energy transition.
Okay. And shift them to a more individual level and not governmental or like countryside. For example, me as a person, what can I do to be more sustainable with my energy? Like, for example, like what I said, and I was now thinking, for example, I don't know from where does my apartment get the light, for example. Can I do something more, or can I try to be more informed? Can I take action? What would you recommend to be more sustainable as an individual?
I can already think of some ways. So, for example, I became a European Solidarity Corps volunteer in the renewable energy sector, which I think is a big contribution to that already. Then also on a daily basis, you can, yes, in Germany, as far as I know, you can choose your energy supplier. For example, in Russia, you definitely cannot. We just have like a few, and but in Germany and in most European countries, it's definitely possible. So yeah, you can ask your energy supplier if you can switch to renewable energy or to eco energy, because using eco-labeled product with the eco energy eco label is one of the ways of supporting companies and organizations that use our label. For example, our office in Helsinki, it's all supplied with eco energy, and also all of our volunteers flats are also supplied with eco energy, because you can just make a contract here in Finland and say that yes, I want eco energy labeled electricity, and they will give it to you. But what is important is demand for that. Even if you don't know whom to call, just call your energy supplier and say, do you have renewable energy? And then when there is demand, the companies adjust, and the companies also say, yeah, okay, we now have for example, last month you asked us if you have eco energy labeled electricity. Yes, this month we are their licensees, and now we have this electricity, for example. So yeah, and also supporting the companies that communicate about that they use renewable or sustainable energy is also very important. And I'm very happy that now companies use it as their marketing tool and they communicate about it. Unfortunately, you would think like most companies that do good deeds, they probably communicate about it and they scream about it. But actually, working at EcoEnergy showed me that it's not the case. And a lot of companies are secretly using sustainable energy, which is very surprising to me. But I've heard this perspective on that, if we will tell about how many good things we are doing, people will be like, oh, but you do this bad thing and that bad thing. So it's also a very important thing to not discourage. Like, we all do as much as we can. We all are trying to, or it's best to try to as sustainable as possible. So when you're doing something and then you hear some, oh, but you ate meat yesterday, for example, don't listen to them. Just do as much as you can. We're all humans. And yeah, I think it's very good that you're asking this question, and that I think people who are watching us right now, they're also asking themselves, like, what can I do to be sustainable? What can I do to not contribute to climate change? Yeah, so it's very good.
Thank you. Yeah, because actually you mentioned it beforehand, but the next question was like, as we as general public, how to get involved. And I think because I was in the conversation yesterday about climate change, I think to be aware of and to demand it are the first steps, because we all know that the bigger picture is what the government does and how do they do this. But if people, I think, were in, for example, demonstrating against nuclear energy, then there wouldn't be a change. So I think what you advise is to get in. The best way to get involved then is to be aware and to demand it.
Yes,
Okay.
and to communicate about everything you do. Start your own Instagram blog and say, hello guys, today I'm going to tell you about how I am becoming sustainable. It's also a plan. I think people are interested in that. People do want to know more about it and educate themselves on this topic. So I think by educating others, educating yourself, you can already make change, not only you, but also in your community.
Thank you.
There's one thing I wanted to add to that, especially speaking about the switch towards an eco supplier. Let's say when it comes to electricity in Germany, that might be a special case in Germany. However, I've heard similar points being raised by international colleagues from the WWF across Europe. For example, if I'm now I personally am with the 100% renewable sourced supplier. However, I'm generating only a fraction of the additional renewable capacity that is added each year, that is mainly financed by all the electricity customers. So there is a very limited gain, and I think that's almost on the verge towards yeah, not saying, I'm not going to say customer fraud, but telling, let's say, at least creating a different or difficult imagination for the customer, because the largest share of certificates that are used to be sold, let's say in Germany, as green electricity are in fact certificates from old hydropower plants in Scandinavia and the Alpine region. So they are so this demand is not yet creating the additional generation capacity that we are desperately seeking for. And I think that is something that we need to be aware of. And certainly this is something, Tamara, that we could discuss later onwards, because we as WWF, we are currently thinking on how could we implement the RED II directive from the European Union in certain ways that we could in fact use this demand, not so much necessarily from the customer perspective, really, but mainly from large consumers on the company and industrial side, to really create this demand. Because in fact, once they will know, okay, there are not enough certificates, we really, our investors demand us to be 100% renewable by 2030. I know that Bayer, Siemens, for example, they have goals to become 100% renewably sourced by 2030, and they are very much thinking on where to set up the generation capacity, and that new forms of financing those installments, such as power purchase agreements, are becoming increasingly popular in that regard, to create, let's say, a second market outside the state regulation, or the let's say outside the feed-in tariff or auction supported generation capacity. And that, I think, one thing I wanted to say also is, I think it's a difficult point to address the individual and loading a lot of responsibility towards, or let's say to individualizing the responsibility in addressing climate change. I think what you said, Maria, is really crucial. Become aware of the issue and address the issue, be it your electricity supplier, be it your local representative in your local parliament or your state parliament or your federal parliament, or so on. And most importantly, address this issue so that the public becomes aware, and that investors do not sign off investments that are not compatible with a transition pathway towards net zero. And I think this is really taking off at the moment. I think there are few large companies that can afford to ignore this. We are seeing those cases such as Shell last week, and so on. And I think we really are in need of much more public support and awareness, and to address this on a much larger scale.
And to finish with the theme of if individual, what can you do as an individual and the general public? I don't know, Hanna, from your experience, do you have any other advice, or what have you seen also from this acceptance of technologies? How is the best strategy to communicate and to spark this change and to inspire more people?
It's definitely a difficult one. I think a very important thing is to communicate as early as possible, and to also kind of include the people, because one of the things that we see in Germany is that we do want to build windmills onshore, but then especially in Germany there's a lot of kind of pushback against it, because not in my backyard, this whole thing. And as far as I know, there are some projects where the people that will be living close in the close vicinity, if you communicate with them early on, and they also have, so to speak, they also have like some benefit from these windmills in their vicinity, they are much more likely to respond positive to it. So I think that's one important issue: communicate early, and give the people something, give something to the people. And another thing I think is when you think about energy, don't think only about electricity, because it's not only electricity, it's the heating, it's also for, like I said, industrial processes. It's a lot of energy, and also especially for transportation we use a lot of energy, and that is like 95% fossil fuel. So if you can switch maybe to using your feet, definitely don't use those like e-scooters that are in Germany for rent. Not sustainable, really.
Not sustainable, yeah, because of the batteries, or
They have I mean, now maybe the lifetime has increased, but they have an incredibly short lifetime of only like several months, because again, if it doesn't belong to me and it's not mine, I won't treat it as well. So if it's for rent, people will not treat it as good. So they have a very short lifetime, and maybe you have seen this already in some cities, but at night there are people collecting those e-scooters with cars, putting them back into so they are recharged, and maybe done some maintenance is done on them, and then they again take the car, drive around the city to distribute them again. So it's like,
I never
if
thought
you
about it. Mhm.
yeah, then again it depends. If you use the e-scooter instead of the car, that's already a little bit better. But if you use the e-scooter instead of walking, walking is better.
Yeah, no, I'm a little bit against the scooters, because you see them laying around the whole city, and you have like I think I have counted the different brands that there are, and there are like in Germany 4 or 5 different ones, and then yeah, no, I'm more like a walker, but yeah, I have never thought about, now that you said, also not just think about electricity, also industrial processes, but also this business processes, that maybe you thought, okay, there's a really cool idea to rent these scooters, but then you didn't thought about, okay, the reparations, and how do you construct them and all this stuff. So okay, I will think more about also processes in my company too, how to be more greener. We have other questions from Discord, and here it says, everyone wants a green future, but don't want to wind turbine in their backyard. Should it be political or individual decision, and how to solve, and how do you see we could solve this dilemma? We also said to communicate early and to communicate the benefit. Um, do you think it could be possible to, like they are asking here, that politically the government decides, hey, we're gonna put this on your backyard for a better and green future?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important, at least from the studies that I know of, that at least in Germany, it's fair to say that there is no such a thing as NIMBY. I mean, there is this phenomena, but it's a minority, and it's a very well articulated, organized, and loud minority, and they do not represent the largest share of population. And we have several surveys that show that the vast majority of people in Germany living inside the city, but also in rural areas, are in support of renewable energy solutions and are also in support of onshore wind. And interestingly, especially in those areas where you have a where you have a long history of community organized projects, regions that are pioneer regions in deploying renewable energy solutions within their communities, basically also in connection with their municipal utility. We have a very, very strong support and growing support for renewables. That means that is something I might even compare this to the phenomena of xenophobia. Let's say once you are in direct contact with renewables and even with onshore in your direct vicinity, the levels of support even grow. So it's mainly the case in areas that are not yet in touch with with renewable energy solutions, that there is an uninformed opposition towards change. And I agree 100% with Hanna. The key towards addressing this is early, transparent information, really and transparent dialogue, and last but not least, the opportunity for the community and the affected people to directly profit from cheaper electricity tariffs, for example, and let's say something like a downward payment or so on, and obviously also financing projects of communal service in their region. For example, increasing the quality of the public transportation in rural areas and so on, or giving more of the revenues towards communal services and increasing the quality of the local. The local library is always a big example in terms of digitalization. I sometimes question this, but maybe increasing the local pool or whatever. But I think we need to have an informed discussion on that. And I think it's sometimes a bit too easy to just say there is this NIMBY phenomena. There are some people very much loudly opposing this project. What's up with the 90% that are rather quiet? Why do we not talk to them? Why do we not involve them and inform them about what's going on in their community and engage them?
Okay. Tamara, do you have any other strategy or something you want to share with us about how do you convince people, companies, and governments to go into your program?
Well, I think that if we go back to the question, I think that governments shouldn't act before people, and people shouldn't act before governments. We all have to develop at the same time. And I think that we shouldn't persuade each other. We have to agree that climate change is real, that we have to do something, and not just something, but to switch to 100% renewable and sustainable energy. And if politicians aren't sure of what to do, they can wait but not stand opposed. They shouldn't invest in fossil fuels. They should invest in renewables. They should regulate fossil fuel policy. And we as individuals have to also show our interest, talk about it, and communicate about it. And when it comes to persuasion of the companies, of course, in Russia, and it's the same everywhere, but I mainly work with Russian companies, so I definitely can think of a couple of examples where people just say, well, why do we need to use your eco-label? Why do we need it? We can just use renewable energy and then write on our website that we use renewable energy. We don't need sustainable energy, or we don't need a confirmation from you if it's not monetized, if we can't get more money out of it. So what is important when we think about it, of course, it is kind of a selfish answer, and of course it is not acceptable. But when we think about it, what conclusion can we reach? Well, first of all, for customers, for buyers, it should be important that the products that they buy are made with renewable energy. They should be educated. They should, as you said, Maria, before, that, I turn on the light and I think, it's electricity, right? I don't think where it comes from. And it is the case with most people on this planet. And it was the same for me, but then I learned a lot on this topic and I realized, oh my God, everything I'm doing has an impact, and it's crazy. So first of all, we should we should benefit those companies who are already trying to switch to renewables, and then companies will follow as well. They already have these targets to reach 100% renewable by 2040 or 2030, but it's still not early enough, because we all know what's going to happen. In 2029, all the companies will rush and say, we need a renewable energy, but how are we going to have enough of this renewable energy if we can't see the demand now, so the energy doesn't develop? So it's all very, this process is all codependent. Everyone should take part in it. Companies, the governments, small companies, huge corporations, individuals, and of course, governments of the whole world should think, okay, what are we doing? Because fossil fuels are going to get cancelled very soon, and the people who work on coal mines have to be requalified, and they have to be retrained in order to also work in the new areas, because no one is telling these people right now that, oh, you know, we are going to run out of coal and you'll lose your job. Of course, we have to retrain them. We have to tell the truth to people and communicate about it a lot, and we have to scream about it, basically, because people are sleeping, I think, still, and education here will be definitely key.
Thank you. We have a question from Discord, and is, do you think we're close to a widespread of use of sustainable energy, or do we still have a long way to go? Now that you mentioned all these years, 2030, 2040, are we fit, or do we need to be faster?
Well, I think we definitely need to be a little bit faster if we want to really reach like carbon neutrality in 2050. Like I said, I think I sound like a broken record by now. For like electricity, I think we know the way to go. We know we should, put up wind power plants and PV solar power. So I think that path is kind of, we're on track there more or less, but we will need much more in all these other areas. Like I said, for 30 years, essentially nothing has happened in the transportation sector. The industry sector also needs to be decarbonized and defossilized. And the thing with these kind of processes with the industry, especially, you have very, very long investment cycles. So if you, for example, build a furnace to make steel, you build it and then you use it for 40 years. And only after 40 years of like usage, day and night, all the time, you will like decommission it. So you have very long investment cycles. So the furnace you will build now will still be standing in like 2060, 2070. So there's still going to be like some, let's say, residue of like older technologies that we will still kind of drag with us, so to speak, until 2050. So I think it's important. The more we do now, the better it is. So I think it's really important to reduce CO2 emissions now as much as possible, because it's better to reduce like 1 kilogram of CO2 now than potentially maybe 15 years down the road, because that emission 15 years down the road is going to be that much more difficult to reduce.
Yeah. And now, Hanna, that I have you on the spot, someone told me to ask you directly if you think, or how is your expert opinion about materials, and talking about renewable. Here they ask, does the sustainable aviation fuel really can be sustainable or can become more sustainable? I don't know if you have any experience on this topic.
I think that's actually this jet fuel, or whatever you want to call it, the synthetic kerosene. I think that is essentially the only way to make aviation sustainable, because batteries will not work really up in the air. I think that's a major security risk. I have heard that there are some like small planes working with fuel cells, so working with hydrogen essentially. But I'm not really too sure about that. So I think for like really those large planes that we like to use to go on vacation, I think the synthetic kerosene is going to be like the only option that we have, and therefore it is important to use. You really need a large amount of renewable energy, of sustainable energy, electricity, in order to make that synthetic kerosene.
Thank you. I think this person will be happy to hear this. And now a question for all of you three that has been here asked, but before now, this same person wanted to know, how do you see the jet fuel tax exemption? Should it be abolished?
The jet fuel tax. I have to pass on that one. That I do not know. I'm sorry.
Sorry, people. We
As
are
far as
we are
as
not,
far as
yeah.
I know, it's not it's not only exempted in Germany but internationally, and obviously, this, in my opinion, has to change drastically. Um, Even going back to last week towards, or I think it now 2 or 3 weeks ago, with the ruling or the decision of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany towards the issue of intergenerational justice and investments or investment decisions made today need to take into account the the freedom of choice for future generations to be there or to be intact, requires us to drastically increase the pricing of CO2, and within the next decade start to be on par with the today's costs that CO2 emissions generate for the whole of the society worldwide. I think the latest numbers by the Environmental Federal Agency in Germany showed that we are somewhere around 159 euros per ton of CO2. So we are very far away from being on par with prices and costs for CO2 in Europe, or at least in Germany. And when it comes towards the speed, it's hard to not to stress really the importance to drastically speed up the deployment of renewables. I know that in 2020 we installed 1.5 gigawatts of onshore wind, but we need to be somewhere around 7 gigawatts per year, and every year from now on. Not to say the drastic decrease in CO2 emissions that need to continue at the Corona 2020 levels every year until we have reached zero, in order to not breach the Paris Accord. So the challenges are just tremendous, and there is no such thing to say, okay, we increase our actions in that area and slow down a bit there. Hanna mentioned it perfectly many times. Transportation emissions have slightly increased but not decreased, and if I'm correctly informed, we are even worse off than we were, a bit worse off than we were 30 years ago. And I think especially in sectors such as transportation, it becomes apparent that it's not necessarily only an individual informed decision of a voter or a citoyen or something, but really that you need infrastructure. In Berlin, we do see that even those pop-up bike lanes increase traffic with cyclists drastically, or there's a good example of what is happening with Anne Hidalgo currently doing in Paris. So especially on those issues such as transportation and heating, we do need the political leverage, because there are decisions way above the head of individuals to be taken, and those are just those are political processes that we as informed citizens need to demand from our politicians to address.
Thank you very much. Now the public is asking, what role do power markets such as Nord Pool or international energy trade in general have in the transition to renewables? This question is for the three of you.
Well, I can quickly maybe touch upon that. I think we are seeing an increasing internalization of the electricity market in the European Union, and that is itself, I think, a very good thing, because you create a lot of benefits as you increase the market area and, for example, obviously provided with the fact that you need to have a drastic extension of the power of the electrical grid, and therefore it's, in my opinion, a big plus to further internalize or let's say integrate the internal electricity market and to really benefit from synergy, so to speak, that you are not necessarily having to have, let's say, a gas-fired unit as a backup in France or in Germany, but there is a single one that is sufficient, and that you have better better weather forecast, better market balancing between supply and demand. And I think the further, let's say, as I mentioned before, the further integration of markets is only a benefit, and can only increase the speed for the energy transition.
Thank you. Hanna and Tamara, some other thoughts about the topic?
I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay, then we have another question here, and it goes as this: how to deal with the companies and countries for whom development or renewable energy goes against their interest?
Well, I guess it can't go against interest anymore because renewable energy is becoming cheaper. And also we are, of course, all of us are interested in actually surviving and living for the next maybe 20 years at least. So of course it can't go, or also the image of the company is very important, and it's important to communicate and to build trust with the clients. So I cannot see how renewable energy can be against values of a company. I guess if you face that, you can always just educate the person and tell them about the good things and the bonuses which you get when you use renewable energy.
I think some states in the international arena that are heavily dependent on their export revenue of fossil fuels. Tamara, for example, mentioned Russia or Saudi Arabia and so on, are not necessarily the most democratically organized states. And I think in the political discussion, you often hear of something called the resource curse. And I think those states really need to envision a world in where they have a narrowing down time window to shift their revenues towards the installment of a sustainable energy system, because sooner or later there will be not that many people or not that many states continuing to import their fuels, because, as I mentioned before, just strictly from an economic perspective, it's much cheaper to go into renewables. And I think that time frame is really narrowing drastically, and will increasingly do so. So I think the clock is ticking for those players to use their revenues that they can still generate now for a sustainable transition, just purely from their own interest to survive as an actor.
Okay, and now we are reaching the last 30 minutes of our conference. Thank you again for your time. And we're going to go to the topic of politics and maybe talk a little bit more about materials. So we had some questions about, for example, CO2 and the different materials that are there. And in the political point of view, we wanted to know what political changes are necessary to make energy more sustainable on your expertise. For example, especially industries like steel, glass, and construction.
I think for that you will need much more renewable and sustainable energy on the one hand. Also the necessary infrastructure and so on. From the political level, I think what is most important is to have what we have like heard from some of our project partners is to have a sense of security in terms of like the law that is applied, because currently they are a little bit unsure about the regulations. And so of course, if you are looking at investing several millions of euros into like a new production facility, you need to be sure that it will, that it pays off, because otherwise maybe your entire company might go bankrupt. So they really need to be able to kind of plan with all the regulations that are in place. And this is, I think, one of the things from the like political perspective that is very important to build that security in that realm.
Thank you. Some other thoughts here, Tamara or Henrik?
Yeah, I can only second that. I think, as I mentioned also on my slide before, I think it's really important that we are dealing with path dependencies here, and we need to be well informed what investment decisions we are taking now, because we have seen in the late 1990s and even in the early 2000s that we still invested in new hard coal-fired power plants in Germany. That are currently part of the coal exit agreement in Germany, and that the phase out of those plants is in fact financed by the taxpayer in Germany. And I think not only does this cost money, but it also costs a lot of political capital. And in that regard, I think it's crucial that we're well aware of setting a framework within which the actors really know what is coming. That we set a corridor of a expectedly rising CO2 price, and as Hanna mentioned, also providing the investors both for the supply side as well as the demand side with a clear perspective that we are serious on the path to climate neutrality, and that those investments will pay off and do have a let's say that we are enabling them to become market makers for markets that are not necessarily there yet today, but that are increasingly sought after in 10 years and further.
Yeah, and from my front, I could add that yes, the formula is very easy. It's just the Paris Agreement for first and foremost, of course, and of course investing in renewables, because we definitely will see with our own eyes, I think almost everyone here, how the power will be decentralized, and renewables are helping with that. And I really do believe that if governments will invest in renewable energy, we'll see a different world already, like in 10 years, because there will be other countries that will be richer, that will be nicer to live. And also what I think some of you might know, this new city called Neon, where they make it all like sustainable, and I think it's in Saudi Arabia. And I think this is a clear example of what politicians can do. They can invest, and they can encourage others to make cities like that, a city which will be 100% sustainable in all walks of life, starting from energy and up to like the food and the chain and supply chain and everything. And yeah, I think this is the way to go, and this is our future.
And for example, now I was thinking, and maybe that this is just like an opinion question, thinking about the mixture between government and enterprises and in the industry, what do you think it's like a better technique to get people like involved in these renewable energies, to, for example, to be really really strict and put like a policy that on this year all people has to have a renewable energy, or to go more maybe in a positive way and offer, for example, companies this CO2 certificates or these renewable certificates, or what you do with the eco energy, Tamara. um, in your opinion, what would be like a better or more efficient way to get all people to be renewable?
I think it's a very difficult question to be discussing the pros and cons of certain supply schemes or jurisdictions. The last 20 years, I think in Germany at least, the feed-in tariffs were really successful in decreasing the generation costs. And we have seen solar and wind leading the race and being the clear technological and economic winners, mainly above all offshore wind. I think the last tenders were at the zero cost. So um, yeah, I think it's not necessarily anymore so much, at least when it comes towards financing renewables. I think that is not anymore the question. I think they are cheap enough. They are much cheaper than fossil fuels in any setting that I know of. Some parts of the world we see new solar parks entering at 0 cent bits. So in my opinion, is rather how do we address different, let's say, neighboring areas of jurisdiction when it comes towards, for example, planning and permitting. How do we move aside those barriers and let's say assure a timely deployment? And I think the economic question, at least when it comes to financing renewables, is more or less out of the way. And I think the more we start to discussing pricing CO2 fairly according to the, as I said before, occurring costs, we have more and more leverage towards shifting those revenue streams towards the financing of infrastructure, towards helping out socially marginalized groups with the financing of their energy bills and so on. So I think it's one way or the other. I think we will face a discussion about a redistribution of revenue streams that is obviously very contrary to revenue streams that fossil fuel companies are seeing nowadays. And obviously, this is not necessarily something their shareholders like to see, but that's what we will see, in my opinion.
Thank you. And here I got the question from our public that says, we still have to build an infrastructure for the renewable energy, for example, energy storage, transportation, etc. Where do the investments for energy transitions are coming from nowadays? Do you know if it is the state or the company's investments?
I think it's both in some sense. So if a new offshore wind park is being installed, then that's companies investing into it. One of these projects that I'm working on, which is the H2 Mare, and some other projects, there are some companies involved that are really spending a lot of money to kind of build up these wind parks, and also research how to put electrolyzers offshore so you can produce the hydrogen offshore as well. For infrastructure, I think that's more in the realm of the state, so to say, because if you have like an infrastructure, like for example for electricity, then one of the rules, so to speak, is that every supplier of electricity has access to that network, so they can put in the electricity, and that will also apply to any other type of infrastructure that you may see in the future, like for hydrogen, for example.
Mhm. And one special fact about the energy transition in Germany, to my knowledge, I think the largest share, and by far the largest share, I think way above 60% of the installed renewable energy capacity in Germany is in fact financed by private individuals and organized in even community-based projects. So that is the historical, that's where historically the energy transition or the deployment for renewables took off. Now that we see the shift towards auctioning schemes that technically favor actors with a better access towards capital markets and companies, we see a shift into, let's say, capital intensive projects such as Hanna mentioned, offshore projects, and especially electrolyzers and the cable network connection and so on, that is mainly financed by utilities. And we see it becoming increasingly difficult for smaller groups of private investors to engage in citizen-led communities to invest in renewables. And I think this is something that we need to take into account, because the energy package, the 55% package that is currently under negotiation in the European Commission, used to be called the CE for all package, the clean energy for all package, and the European Parliament, for good reasons, decided to put the citizen at the heart of the new energy regulation in Europe. And I think this is something that we need to take in mind if we want to have an informed customer and an informed citizen in our future European democracy, that they do have at least the possibilities, for example, as in Denmark, to invest in communal energy projects. Or as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm informed, in Denmark, for example, it's not even possible to project a windmill without informing the adjacent living population. I think there is a radius of 5 kilometers or something, and you need to have a certain percentage of the capital invested in that wind farm to come from the neighbors, to address such issues within minority NIMBY phenomena and so on, and to create ownership and a certain sense of belonging within that community, that this is my source of electricity. And I think those issues are not to be left out of the debate. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question. Are there still, or do you know, are there still spendings and investments on, for example, pipelines and help for the steel industry? If yes, why do you think they still happening?
I could quickly answer this, and I think that Nord Stream 2 is, for example, is one example, that there is still ongoing investment and planning procedures and permitting procedures that, for example, we, as well with other environmental NGOs in Germany, are fighting against, also legally, at the moment. Yes, those are investment decisions that have been made years ago, sometimes decades ago, and are now being realized in a time that has fundamentally changed. And I think also now with the federal court ruling, we do see a fundamentally changed legally environment for those projects. Yeah, that's regarding the pipeline projects. And also we have seen the history of the Keystone XL pipeline in the US, going back and forth between the Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administration now. Yeah, I do think that that the tides are changing and in favor of change. Really, we are not going to see further. I think it's much harder for investors to justify those projects. And for the steel industry, I'm not familiar with current projects there.
Okay, thank you um, for your insights. I don't know if Hanna and Tamara want to add something or have some expertise here.
No, I think what Henrik touched upon, I think is kind of like the main issue. A lot of times these were decisions that were made years and years and years ago, and now there's a legally binding contract. There has been some work that has been done already. So now I think it's just difficult to kind of back out of it. So I think this is like the main issue.
And for example, talking about these processes or these legislations, um, to all of you, do you think that this what about this is slowing down the projects? For example, when building these windmills, what about birds get killed with the wind turbines? Does this happens also in these projects?
Yeah, definitely that happens. And I also know an example of one politician saying that wind turbines are not good because the worms in the soil get killed and birds can get killed, which is, of course, when you think of the scale of fossil fuels and the industry and the detrimental effect that this industry does, and will it can ruin my future. Yeah, I'm as an individual, I'm only thinking about me and my future, and the future of the society as a whole. And I know that fossil fuels make greenhouse gases, and it produces greenhouse effect, and then basically that's like a bomb. Like it's going to, if we don't stop it, it's going to make a really, really bad effect. So these facts are, of course, we can't deny that there is a biodiversity crisis and that, yes, the problem exists. But at the same time, the technologies are are developing. And I know that there is a technology that like these are like sensors on the wind turbines, and that recognizes bats, so bats aren't getting killed. So these technologies are emerging and they are growing, and some of them, or a lot of them, already exist. So of course we can't take into account seriously this whataboutism, yeah, how you called it, or these fake news as well, like when people make up stories and say that climate crisis isn't real, for example. Of course, this has a very bad effect. And when we think about the media and information, it's important to clear these things out and to educate people and to tell them the truth, the facts, yeah, and communicate about technologies as well, modern solutions to these problems. So even though, yes, there are problems, and yes, the technologies aren't perfect, but they are developing. And year by year, day by day, there are more and more positive and impactful technologies that we should definitely rely on, rather than just switching to fossil fuels and forgetting about this whole renewable energy thing. Of course, this is incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that you said, Tamara, that I think is really important, that there is no perfect solution. So I think one thing that we have to kind of get used to and let it sink in, that no matter how well we do with renewable and sustainable energy, we will never have zero impact on the planet. I think that's just not possible. It's just I think the goal should be just to minimize it as much as possible. And to preserve as much as possible. And like on a larger scale, I sometimes hear the whataboutism in terms of, well, but what about China, for example? They have way worse emissions than Germany. Why should Germany, ruin their economy, because USA and China, they are much worse. And I think for me that's like the kind of the wrong way to go about it, because the industrialized country like Germany, like all of Europe, like the US as well, we kind of started this mess, so to speak. We were the ones burning and using fossil fuels on a large scale like decades ago, already 100 years ago. So a lot of the problems that we see now are actually done because we have been doing that for like over 100 years already. So now going, pointing the finger at other countries that have, just started doing the same thing that we did just, 10 years, 20 years ago, is kind of a little bit beside the point. Plus, I think it's more, a more positive way to look at it, I think, and to better frame it is everyone in the world is essentially striving to, have a rich country to, so that people can lead a good and healthy and happy life and everything. And we have achieved that using fossil fuels. So now I think it's time for us to show and set an example that you can reach this also by using renewable energy.
Yeah, let's do it. To close this panel discussion, because now we have 10 minutes, we have the closing question that would be, in a political and public discussion, there are voices concerned about losing jobs due to the energy transition. What would you tell them?
Well, maybe I can quickly start on that, because what I think is quite remarkable is the debate, at least in Germany, that we've had throughout the last 5 to 4 years, parallel to the coal exit. We have had a very fierce debate on losing 20,000 jobs in the coal industry, but it was never really mentioned that we had, at the peak time, I think, around 390,000 jobs in the renewables industries. So the ratio, and you can even break that, I do not know the numbers, but you can obviously break that down towards a megawatt of generation capacity installed, and the work, the jobs it creates. You have a much better ratio for that, for the renewables. And you only need to look at the Biden plan in the US, and I think that this the argument that the energy transition, yes, it does cost some jobs, but those jobs are not going to be sustained in a world where we take Paris seriously. So in fact, the energy transition is a huge job motor, in my opinion. Yeah.
This is really good to know. I think I want to thank you for your time. It's really good to hear. I think it was really refreshing, because yesterday I was at the panel discussion on climate change, and I left a little bit terrorized. And now that I know of all these energies and all these different processes that we can make, and we are going a little bit slower, but we are going towards a greener future. I'm really happy about it. So thank you for this refreshing conversation about sustainable energies. I don't know if someone of you has, we have time still for a last question. So I don't know if any one of you wants to ask one another something, a burning question, in something they want to get out of your chest. No, I hear silence. That's good. No fight. So then, before closing this panel discussion, thank you again. I don't know if some of you wants to give some goodbye words, or some quote, or some inspirational phrase, or some message to the public. If not, you are free to go, and then I will just make some announcement from the event.
I just want to thank you for, having this opportunity to speak here today in this panel discussion.
Yeah, and I also want to thank you. And I know that in these really difficult times, it was hard to organize an event like this. And I can only imagine how many sleepless nights you guys have had, because I remember ISWI 2019 and it was like amazing. So of course, now we are, of course, each of us are doing as much as we can. And I really appreciate your effort. And the last words for me would be to that everyone, even if no matter how old you are, what you do, what your profession is, everyone can contribute to the sustainable future of ours. And I really hope that people who watched us today and who will watch us later, watch this recording, are left with this feeling that of inspiration. They can do something, and you guys you are the future. So please do things and live sustainably. Don't listen to whataboutism that we discussed here and fake news. And thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think those were really good final words from Tamara, in fact, to close the talk. So I just wanted to thank you guys, Maria, Tamara, and Hanna, for this very inspiring talk. And yeah, I think as Tamara said, especially going out to your to the audience, to those young students out there, you are the ones to implement the change that we want to see. And that's, as Tamara said, it's a bit like this Gandhi thing, right? Be the change you want to see in the world, and carry the message forward. And yeah, there are serious and tremendous challenges ahead, but we need to be optimistic in addressing them.
Thank you very much. I think that's good. And as we said, to be aware and to activate a little bit more and to stay positive, because if hope is the last thing we have to lose. So we're continuing doing this talks and this kind of programs. Thank you again for your time, and to all the participants that are out there. Don't forget, you can still go to the Discord channel, and continue the discussion. And if you're interested in some more topics, tomorrow at 12, we're going to have a keynote on climate communication. Then at 1:30, it's going to be a live sports session, so we're not sitting the whole time. Then at 2, there are the group works until 5. And then we have a last keynote for the day at 6:30, that we are going to talk about the sand crisis. So thank you again, and have a great start in the week. Happy Monday.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Bye.